It's a great pleasure and privilege to be, of course, sitting here next to John Berger. John, I would like to ask you, if I could, just to start. This is a book that takes us from the caves to canvases and beyond to other art forms in the contemporary space. It travels over 30,000 years in a single volume, and along the way it stops in all sorts of extraordinary stations, which together form a great line, a great story of art. In your introduction, you say, I'll just read very briefly from it, from the preface, "I've always hated being called an art critic. It's true that for a decade or more I wrote regularly in the press about artists, exhibitions, museum shows, and so the term is justified. But in the milieu in which I grew up since I was a teenager, to call somebody an art critic was an insult. An art critic was somebody who judged and pontificated about things he knew a little or nothing about. He wasn't as bad as an art dealer, but he was a pain in the arse." The term that you kind of drew to yourself in thinking about what you did and what you do is the idea of being a storyteller.
Yes.
And that translates across all media, regardless of the form. And so thinking about what it means to tell a story about an image, or to tell a story about an artist, a body of work, does that sense of storytelling anchor and inform you from the very beginning of the encounter with an image? Or is that sense of a story to be told, does it come later?
No, I don't think it comes later. I mean, I think it's there from the beginning because I think it's there. I mean, I can't help it. But maybe there's something to be said there about storytelling. Because as I see it, the secret of true storytelling is to try to establish a relationship of hospitality towards the listener or reader. I mean, storytelling is a collaboration not only between the storyteller and what he's telling and the people he's talking about, but first and foremost with the reader. And this question of hospitality, of trying to come to an understanding.
You've been involved throughout your life with many artists directly, working with them on their work in whichever medium. You made a switch from painting into writing, and you found that to be the primary expression of your engagement with reality and, of course, with the image. So when you were writing through the many decades that you've been doing so, did the work come to you? Did it become inevitable in a way once you saw it?
Yes, I mean, occasionally one would go and seek out a work, especially old works. But otherwise, you would hear somebody talking about something which made you interested. I don't know. I mean, it wasn't a program. Whether to write about it or not depended upon something concerning it desperately needed to be said today because of the situation that we're living in, which is always difficult. I mean that situation has changed. And yeah, in the 40s and 50s, I mean, it was the period of the angry young men who were impatient and angry because the dreams and promises very much generated through the victory of the war and the defeat of fascism were not being realized swiftly enough or extensively enough. And today we live in a period of angry old men. And they are angry because the world in which we are living in, the world of fascist finance, is a world which reduces attention and priorities on decisions which affect the entire planet with the perspective of an instant, the instant of a deal. And so the notion of a different future, the recollection of a past, the company, the present company of the dead, the imagined company of future generations who will be different, all of that which is so essential to the sensation of being human. I mean, you can call it history, but it's very much more complicated than that. I mean, that is being systematically destroyed by the information with which we are surrounded.
Thank you. In many ways that leads on to, but also answers the question I was going to raise about the relationship between the art that you're writing about and the pressure, which you've so wonderfully described, behind it of the world and the time in which it might have been made, or certainly in which you've been writing about it, and that need to tell the story of the times.
I was always writing, actually. I mean, I began writing from the age of 9, 8. Stories, poems. I found the other day a story that I wrote in 1942, so I was 16, which was a very, very realistic story about the resistance movement in France, which was then going on. So but I was also painting. And the reason why I stopped painting the end of the 40s, beginning of the 50s, is that what was happening in the world with the threat, above all the threat of nuclear war, this is before the Soviet Union had parity, was so pressing that to paint pictures which then somebody go and hang up on the wall. But to write urgently in the press, anywhere, everywhere, seemed so necessary that I abandoned painting. And after that, I abandoned it. I still draw, but that's all. I read you one poem of mine, written 25 years ago. Mother, let me cry, not letterpress nor telex, nor stainless speech bulletins announce disaster with impunity, but the pages of the wound. Mother, let me speak not adjectives to color their maps of wretchedness, nor nouns to classify the families of pain, but the verb of suffering. My mother tongue taps the sentence on the prison wall. Mother, let me write the voices howling in the falls.
Thank you. Given the situation, the world we find ourselves in now, there's the possibility of getting much more information about the thinkers of the past and ideas of the past because of technology primarily perhaps. But it's about encouraging a certain kind of way of thinking and seeing in relation to that material and what your thoughts might be on that process.
We find very few references, and if there are references, they're completely false ones, in what we read in the media, mostly, in what we hear, in the speeches that are made. I mean, to understand history, one needs a political language. For a political language to exist and be striking, it has to have some relation to proposed actions or reflection about past, but I mean proposed actions. And that means that those who are speaking this have the power to take decisions. Today, in all the really important things that are happening on the planet, the politicians have no power. And I mean, they know it because the decisions are taken by international fascist capital, by banks and multinationals. I mean, this is true whether we are thinking about the climate and the overheating. It is true if we think about the causes of immigration, if we consider the incredible figures concerning world unemployment. And the self-presented politicians, I mean, what they say has no meaning, and therefore we have no longer any confidence in those words. I mean, the word democracy, in the sense of in defense of democracy, for example, is so abused that in a sense one doesn't want to use the word democracy anymore. I mean, it occurs to me that, okay, there are ideologists who put forth a view of the world which we can more or less call in various ways fascist, which the most important point is that there are real men and sub-men. That's the essential. And then, okay, when we see these, read them or listen to them and so on, we can oppose them, or we do oppose them.
Please do join me in thanking for everything he's done for us, how he has changed us and illuminated the times in which we live. Thank John Berger, please. Thank you.
Thank you.